Spring is finally here, and as the snowpack recedes, wildfire becomes a concern, especially before greenup. What's the outlook for this year's fire season, and how much will standing dead spruce affect it?
At this point in time, it's fighting a losing battle, to be honest, just because the volume of trees out there kind of supersedes any amount that the tree services can keep up with.
We'll check in on prevention plans for the summer and how you can help protect property from wildfire, coming up right now on Alyeska Insight. Take a flight over the Mat-Su Valley, the Anchorage Bowl, or the Kenai Peninsula, and you may notice areas that were once evergreen but have now turned a rusty reddish brown. All of those trees are fuel for wildfires, and a small brown beetle has killed many of them. As Alaska Public Media's Emily Schwing reports, it's not only happening in remote parts of the state, thousands of urban trees are also coming down because of the spruce beetle.
Paul Grozensky is suiting up for a long day of tree climbing and cutting. He owns and operates Paul's Tree Service, and business is really good for him right now.
You get into this industry because you care about trees, not because you want to cut down every single tree in neighborhoods, but unfortunately that's kind of what we're doing now.
As Grozensky wields a chainsaw, homeowner Chet Williams takes one last look at the 3 spruce trees that he's known for much of his life. He bought this house in Spenard more than 40 years ago.
We had friends from Europe come over, and they were just kind of amazed, and they said, "You have so many trees," and I thought, I'd never really thought about it. But, they're part of the neighborhood, and it's a shame.
The crew with Paul's Tree Service will not only remove 3 spruce trees from Chet Williams' front yard, they'll also take down 3 trees in front of the house across the street. Then they'll move on to 3 other properties in Anchorage. According to the State Division of Forestry, more than 1.1 million acres of forest in south-central Alaska have been impacted by the spruce beetle since 2015. 30,000 of those acres are right here in the Anchorage municipality. Grozensky says he takes down between 30 and 40 trees a day.
We're changing entire neighborhoods. If you drive a little bit north, you can see that there's practically no spruce trees left, and if there are ones that are left, they're already brown. So Turnagain got hit hard. That was kind of the first spot, and now it's creeping up hillside, so it's just a matter of time before most areas in town will be affected by it in one way or the other.
Spruce beetles bore into the trees in the fall and start to emerge as temperatures hit 60 degrees or warmer. Once they start to fly in the spring, they'll find more vulnerable spruce trees to attack. So now the crew is racing to take down as many infested spruce trees as possible to help stave off the beetle spread. Even though Paul Grozensky has about a half dozen other tree service companies to compete with, he says there's plenty of business to go around.
At this point in time, it's fighting a losing battle, to be honest, just because the volume of trees out there kind of supersedes any amount that the tree services can keep up with. Even with everybody just cutting spruce trees, it's impossible to get all of them before May. So we'll do it throughout the summer, but it's just one of those things that we just try to do as much as we can, especially before May.
Across town at the Anchorage Botanical Garden, education specialist Patrick Ryan is taking his regular morning walk through the forest. It's not just signs of spring he's looking for. There's also evidence that the spruce beetle has been hard at work here.
Right here is one of the boreholes from the beetles. They're all over here.
Ryan brings along some of his teaching aids, including a little jar of frass. It's the sawdust left behind after the spruce beetle bores into a tree. He says it's a telltale sign of infestation.
And actually the perception, I think, is that all the trees are going to die, all the spruce trees are going to die, and that's not really true. And of course the beetle thing is cyclical.
Ryan is excited to find a small group of spruce saplings during his walk. He'll leave these trees here for now, but he may come back later in the season to dig them up, repot them, and in a few years, replant them in places along the walkways where other older white spruce trees succumbed to the spruce beetle.
By the time that we notice that they're not in good shape, that one's got to go. But as we see, there's hope, there's life.
For Alaska Public Media, I'm Emily Schwing in Anchorage.
This story sure hit home for me. I had to have 5 of my beautiful old mature spruce trees cut down last year, and 3 more will go this summer because of beetles. We'll talk more about that later. But joining me right now this evening to discuss how fire conditions are shaping up across the state is Tim Mowry. Tim is a public information officer for the Alaska Division of Forestry, Wildland Fire, and Aviation Program. And Norm McDonald is the division chief. Welcome,
no, that's
both
Fire
of you.
Information, Alaska Fires.
Thanks, both of you, for being with me this evening. Norm, I want to start with you. We have had some rain in South Central over the last day or so. Not much, but a little. The ground is, of course, soggy from recent snow melt, but this is still a dangerous time for fire before green up, correct?
It is, yeah. The grass season, those early season fires are some of our most challenging, especially with a little wind. So the rain definitely helped, but we'll take that. But it doesn't take very long for that to dry back out again and be a hazard.
Is it particularly dangerous also because people just aren't thinking about fire this time of year when there's still lumps of snow about?
I think that's part of it. You look in the hillsides and in the trees still, there's still some snowpack left. I know everybody's in a rush to get the yards cleaned up and do their yard cleanup, and sometimes with not thinking how the winds can pick up in the afternoon, and like they do around the Mat-Su Valley and Anchorage. So it's one of the times of years where we try to do most of our messaging that we can and just keep educating people about the dangers of fire this time of year, even with a little snowpack still in the trees.
Mm-hmm. Tim, I want to turn to you now. In an earlier interview, you said that pre-green up, the only real fire danger is from people. Explain what you mean by that.
Yeah, well, Lori, obviously we don't have any lightning right now, and there's really only really 2 ways that fires start, and that's human caused and lightning caused. And we don't really get into lightning season until the last week in May or the first week in June. So all the fires we get in April and mid-May are pretty much human caused. And we have already seen several grass fires in the Mat-Su Valley, on the Kenai Peninsula, in the Copper River Basin, that have started mainly as a result of debris burning and piles that aren't extinguished properly or that escape from those piles, or burn barrel fires where fires escape out of burn barrels, or people have burn barrels set on, say, grass rather than mineral soil. And so all the fires we're getting right now are preventable. If you look at things and you follow the guidelines on the burn permits, you shouldn't have a problem. People don't always do that.
How much is alleviated by green up? How much does that really change things?
Green up changes considerably because this dry, dead grass that we have right now it's extremely dry. It's basically freeze dried from the winter, and all the moisture has been sucked out of it, and it'll ignite with a single spark. And once you get green grass and leaves, that's got much more moisture in it, and it's not gonna be nearly as receptive to an ignition source as these dry, dead grasses are, and dead leaves and spruce needles, all that stuff. Once that snow melts, that stuff takes, a little breeze, and it's like a blow dryer, and it's dry in a day or two, and it's ready to ignite.
And Tim, in an earlier interview, you talked about some of the ways that people can unintentionally start fire that they might not be thinking about at all as fire hazards or risks. I know myself, on an ultra dry spring, I was weed whipping in the alley and started to smell kind of a smoldering smell. It was so ultra dry that I stopped because I thought it seemed as if that dry, dead grass was going to ignite just from weed whipping it. So what are some of the things that people may be engaged in that they aren't, being ultra careful because they aren't thinking about fire?
Yeah, no, that's a really good point, Lori. There's innumerable ways that fires can start. I mean, setting a hot chainsaw down on dry grass, on this grass we have right now, can ignite a fire. I mean, last year we had a grass fire start because somebody disposed burning popcorn on a dead dry lawn, and it ignited the grass. You know, sparks from a bad spark arrestor on an ATV or a chainsaw. Anything that can produce a spark. I mean, recreational shooting. If you get a ricochet off a rock or something like that, that's a spark, and it's just looking for an ignition source. And all this dead dry grass is that ignition source. And any kind of equipment that could produce a spark. You know, welding, anything like that. And people aren't necessarily thinking about that. If you're going to do some soldering or welding, you know, you're not necessarily thinking about having dry, you know, dirt around you instead of grass. But we've seen fires start in all those ways and others. So people just, if something can cause a spark, it can cause a fire.
Wow, good reminder not to throw your burnt popcorn out the door into your lawn, that's for sure. Norm, of course, it varies every year depending on spring temperatures and other factors, moisture, but when do you really start monitoring conditions? And is it the interior that generally dries out the first in the state?
Well, the first area to dry is usually our coastal areas, and that's central, south central, those areas, and southeast, with just the lower snowpacks, and then not far behind is the interior. So our first kind of the telltale signs of our fire season are usually Homer and Kodiak. Then you work your way up the peninsula and South Central and Anchorage and Matsu, and then on some years southeast, which is usually the rainforest is potential this time of year as well. And as we talked about, it's usually that dry grass. And it's a shorter window, about a 3 to 4 week window of when that grass is our primary fuel type.
And what are you seeing this spring so far? I know it's early, but how far out can you get a sense of a forecast about the potential fire danger ahead?
Yeah, you know, it's Alaska, the weather is difficult anyways to judge. We are getting better at some of the longer term predictions. Right now, what they're calling for is more of what we call a normal season. Not anything super high like we had in 2004 and 5 and 6 and 15 and 19, but also not predicting anything like we had last year where it was a relatively slow season. So that normal season in Alaska is right around 1 million acres, and depending on where those acreages are, it might be very busy, whether it's in Fairbanks or Kenai or the Matsu area. Those are populated areas, and that's where we have concern. So I don't know if that helps you or not. It's difficult to judge, but what the predictions are showing now is what we call a normal season.
Okay, and of course that can change quickly depending on what comes our way, I know. Tim, you talked about the 3 largest and most damaging fire events here, the Miller's Reach fire in the late 90s that destroyed hundreds of homes, and the other 2 that were more recent fires, the Sockeye fire about 6 years ago. What does this say about the future trend for fire here? Larger and more frequent? Or what are you discerning from the fact that 2 of the largest 3 events have happened within the last few years?
Yeah, Lori, one of those factors is that we have more people moving into what we call the wildland urban interface. You know, the valley wasn't nearly as populated, 30 years ago as it is today in those areas around Willow, where 2 of those fires have occurred. And you were just talking about sizes of fires. It doesn't take a large fire to be devastating. The McKinley fire burned just over 3,000 acres, and the Sockeye fire burned just over 7,000 acres. And in Alaska, neither one of those fires are considered a big fire, where we have fires over 100, 200, 300,000 acres. But if they're in the right place at the right time, they can really have devastating effects like those 3 fires in the valley did. And I'm not an expert, but the fact that those 3 fires have occurred in the Matsu Valley is possibly an indication that that area is becoming more prone to fire. And just the fact that we have a bigger population now, and they're spreading out and they're moving into, you go up and down the Parks Highway and you've got a lot of one-way in, one-way out roads where subdivisions have been constructed, and now there's homes in there that we have to try to protect, and the homeowners have to be conscious of protecting against wildfire. We're just, the population's getting bigger. People they want to live in the woods, and they want trees around their house, and you've got to find a good balance in there.
Mm-hmm. Describe the changes that have been happening when the snowpack melts now as compared to 20 years ago, and how that affects the length and intensity of the fire season.
Sure. The snowpack, studies have shown the snowpack is melting 2 weeks earlier than it did 20 years ago. So our fire seasons are starting earlier, and that has a ripple effect. Because that season's starting earlier, we need to train our people earlier. We need to have them ready to go, by April 1 now instead of May, and after those fire seasons in 2004 and 2005 that Norm alluded to, we asked the legislature to move back the fire season from May 1st, the start of the fire season, to May 1st to April 1st, which is when we require burn permits to do any outdoor burning and use burn barrels. And so we moved our fire season up a month earlier because of these conditions we're seeing. And what that means is, like I said, we've got to be training people earlier and have them ready to go. And it also means a longer season for them, because now in 2019, our fire season went all the way into September, early October. The Swan Lake fire down the Kenai Peninsula was still burning at the end of September, early October. And that's a long fire season for firefighters to hang in there and to be vigilant and to be engaged, and working as hard as they work on a daily basis. That gets really tough. And that's one of the things we're contending with is trying to make sure everybody's trained and ready and is able to put forth the effort that's required to deal with these longer and more extreme fire seasons.
Mm-hmm. That cues up nicely, Norm. I want to turn back to you. This is seasonal work, but as Tim was referencing, it's getting to be a longer and longer season. So how difficult does that make having continuity with trained workers? Both the fact that it isn't a full-time job, but the season is lengthening now.
Yeah, and that's been like Tim mentioned. That's just the trend is longer seasons starting earlier, which means bringing people on earlier to be ready. So the challenge is, always comes down to funding is one of the issues, and having the budget to do that, recruiting and getting people who are interested in this type of work to be able to sign up. When I first started, it was work that a lot of college students did. It was a really good seasonal job between semesters. And then that's changed, not only in Alaska, but the lower 48. And, we've stopped talking about fire seasons, but the fire year. And a lot of our firefighters, they live and work in Alaska, but they could travel the lower 48 when there's fires down there. And it's, what was at one time was a 6-month season is people are working 8, 10, 12 months in Alaska or around the country on supporting the national effort. So it's a national issue that we're having to adapt to these longer seasons.
And how well staffed are you heading into this season? And what does it usually take? What you said this is predicted to be an average year. How many firefighters are needed in an average year?
So we are staffed for the typical spring season. We'll have 250 firefighters available on hand in Alaska, and it does not take very long to exceed those capabilities. So what we have in store and ready is a national plan where we share our resources. So as soon as we get to a point where we cannot staff the fires we need to with what we have in Alaska, we import firefighters from the lower 48. We have a compact with Canada. We've imported aircraft and firefighters from Canada. So when we exceed our capabilities, we have processes to bring help in. And a year like 2019 is a really good example. I think we have brought in just under 7,000 firefighters to Alaska from the lower 48. So the concern we have there is when Alaska has a season like 2019 and the lower 48 has a fire season like 2020 at the same time, shortage of resources nationally. We share very well, but again, there's just a limited pool to go around. And when everybody's busy at once, that's when we really have shortages.
Mm-hmm. Are you able to sort of stand up somewhat quickly when you get to those pinch points like that with volunteer firefighters, or how do you manage that then when resources are stretched so thin?
Yeah, we have a process to prioritize the fires that we'll put people on, and we do that daily. We have a really strong predictive services who looks at the weather and predicts fire behavior over the course of the week, so we can try to stay in front of that and bring people in before there's an emergency and have them ready to go in Alaska. And we work really closely. We've got excellent cooperation through our local fire departments. We work with the federal agencies, the Forest Service and the BLM, and we share resources throughout Alaska. It's a part of the Alaska Fire Plan, and everybody works really well together. So although we are a state of Alaska, we work very closely with all the other fire departments and fire agencies in the state.
Tim, that cues up this next bit of conversation. You had talked about July 10th as the conversion date. Describe what that means. There's 4 categories. I think that's what Norm was just referencing when it comes to prioritizing fires, especially when resources are tight. And do you see that date changing in the future? Maybe moving farther later into July?
Well, and it's not a concrete date, Lori. That is sort of the date that everybody alludes to. But if conditions are such that it's going to require pushing that date back, they do that. And without getting too much into it, is July 10th or that first part of July is typically when we get a weather change in Alaska. Or that didn't happen in 2019, but typically sometime in mid-July we get southwest flow, which brings in moisture, especially to the valley and south central Alaska, and really moderates fire danger. And at that point, our fire suppression agencies and managers will look at the situation, look at how much fire we have on the landscape, and look at the forecast and determine what our fire season is going to look like from there on out. When we get into July, our days are getting shorter, it's getting cooler, our burn window shrinks a little bit. But that's the date sort of where we determine how many resources we need to keep in Alaska and how many resources we can maybe make available to the lower 48. Because like Norm alluded to, this is a national effort. We bring in a lot of firefighters from the lower 48, and when we can, we want to reciprocate and help them when they have bad fire seasons like they did last year. So it's sort of a very fine line, but one thing I want to stress is that we always will keep enough resources in Alaska to respond to initial attack and to protect Alaskans and the resources here. We're not just going to open the door and ship everybody to the lower 48. We've always got people here staffing our area offices, and not just us, but other agencies. And but at some point in the season, we can look at what's going on in the state and out of the state, and sort of make a determination of what resources we need here to keep here, and what resources we can make available to go help other states when they need it.
We only have a couple of minutes left, and Norm, I want to turn back to you. We started the show off with this package story about dead standing spruce trees, or nearly dead standing spruce trees, and what a problem that is. How big of a concern is this for you, especially in these urban areas where it seems like you can look just about anywhere and see a lot of these dead trees?
Yeah, I think you mentioned flying over the Matsu Burrow and seeing the just a sea of brown and gray, and it is a concern. The standing dead are a fuel type that's not only volatile and it helps spread fire, but it's really a dangerous place to work for our firefighters. Those are called snag patches, and it doesn't take a lot of fire impact around the base of those trees and the roots to have them fall down and tip over. And it's just a really dangerous environment to work in. So not only is it a dangerous fuel type for spread, but just operating in that, it's difficult. A lot of our tools we use in a normal forest or fuel type just aren't effective in a beetle kill stand. Sometimes the best option is to back off and get into a different fuel type, and then let that area burn and try to catch it where it's safer, and you're going to have more success.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Norm and Tim, for being with me this evening and raising awareness. We can't prevent fires caused by lightning strikes, but we can prevent human-caused fire. Be prepared when burning on your property. Check local burn mandates, watch the weather for wind conditions, and keep leaves, dead wood, and other fuels clear from around your home and buildings. Make sure your campfires are completely out and watered down before leaving a site to avoid later flare-ups. Get out and enjoy Alaska's beautiful summertime opportunities for camping, fishing, and outdoor fun safely and responsibly. That's it for this episode of Alaska Insight. Be sure to tune in daily to your local public radio station for Alaska Morning News and Alaska News Nightly. And make your voice heard by calling into Talk of Alaska every Tuesday morning. For the latest news from across the state, visit our website, alaskapublic.org. Sign up for our free daily news digest so you don't miss important stories. All episodes of Alaska Insight and related video are at alaskapublic.org/Alaska Insight. Thanks for joining us this evening. I'm Lori Townsend. Good night.